Welcome to PAB 2011.
What I'm really talking about, yes, there's an element of story, but there's an element of more of communication, whether that's live, whether that's listening to music, whether that's watching a film. Hopefully, you're going to be able to identify with at least some part of this presentation today. And when I found out that I was going at 9 a.m., I'm not going to make you do any calisthenics or anything, and the worst you might have to do is hold your hands up for periods of time. So, the phrase, the unattended moment, came from a T.S. Eliot quote. I'm an English major. That's how most people can survive through T.S. Eliot. They get it forced upon them, and then eventually they just get used to it. But in one of his poems, he had what I thought was a fantastic quote. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. First of all, we talk about story and how when people tell stories to each other, or when performers tell stories through their art, through their content, how it communicates with people. Not just from the sense of, here's the message. We'll talk about that in a bit. But how does that message help to transcend you as somebody who's listening? Confused yet? Good. The most underused word in what we should be feeling when we listen to music, we say we're happy a lot. This made me happy, this made me happy. How often can you say that you have felt joy in the past week, in the past month? That's a tough one. It's very easy to say, oh, I met with some friends, we had a really good time, I was happy when I left there. And it's very rare that the word joy comes up. And to me, that's what we should be seeking. Not that happiness is bad, but joy transcends that word of happiness. So I started contemplating the idea of joy between communication as well. And then here's a real technical term for you. And this is what I'm hoping that most of you will be able to really start to identify with. Show of hands, how many of you either have a movie or a set of movies or a song or a set of songs that at a certain point in the movie or a certain point in the song or at a certain point you listen to it and you get shivers up your spine? We know that, right? That's what this presentation is about. Why do we go there? And why is it different for each person? And why is, even more importantly, why is it the same for so many people? And the last thing that I considered from kind of a large concept was the element of surprise and how perhaps one of the most effective ways that this can come up on you is when you're least expecting it. Not necessarily jumping out from behind a wall and scaring the shit out of you, but when you have something out of context. So all of a sudden you're watching, you're listening, you're hearing something, and something totally unexpected happens. And that kind of, for lack of a better term, jolts you. And as we're talking about this, I want you to consider this. When I call it the unattended moment in the communication jam, it's like if I sit back in this room right now and I take one step back out of reality and almost have that moment of, wow, this is cool. This is really cool. And I'm not part of it anymore. I'm almost one step removed from it. If you've ever been to see a live performance, I remember when it used to happen to me all the time. When I used to go to, when I was in high school, they used to have dances on Saturday nights. And you'd be in a room with like 300 people in like the bowels of a church or a restaurant or wherever had a hall. And you'd be standing over on the side, and at one point the music would be playing, the lights would be going, and for a second, you wouldn't be in that room. For a second, you'd be stepping back and you'd be kind of seeing everything that was going on in that room, almost like a play in front of you. That unattended. You've removed yourself from what's going on for that split second to see what's happening. So, I know that's hard to read from a distance, but basically, this is a lot of the stuff that we normally do when we communicate with each other. We have a lot of voices chattering. We have anticipatory cues and conversations. We hear how quickly someone's talking, their dynamics, their tone, all of that stuff, and we react based on what we hear. How do you know when you're about to speak in a conversation? You can tell when someone's trailing off. You play against each other in a conversation. You have interferences. Everything that distracts from true communication, everything, because let's face it, how many people can get across the total idea that you want to get across just by talking? It's difficult. It's even more difficult online. If I do an audio podcast, people don't get to see me waving my hands around. People don't get to see me making faces. They don't get facial tics. They don't get body language clues. They don't get any of that. So communication gets lost. So everything that distracts from that becomes an interference. And that could be through lack of knowledge, me not sharing the same knowledge base as the person I'm communicating with, language, tools, the encoding or decoding process that happens, perception style, expectations, intimacy, and history. And history is a big one. If you come with a shared history, they talk about how brothers and sisters who've grown up all their lives, you don't have to say much, it just takes a look. And people start nodding and they understand what each other are talking about. If you've never met someone before, you try that look, someone might hit you. Okay? And we get feedback when we're talking face-to-face with people, through voice, through body language, all of that stuff. That's our regular communication cycle. And it continues and it goes around and around and around. Then, and I know Adam will like this one because it's a James Joyce quote, I stumbled upon a word which really started to solidify for me what this unattended moment was. I'm going to read it out because I like things better in audio anyway. When the relation of the parts is exquisite, when the parts are adjusted to the special point, we recognize that it is that thing which it is. Its soul, its whatness leaps to us from the vestment of its appearance. The soul of the commonest object, the structure of which is so adjusted, seems to us radiant. The object achieves its epiphany. And that was a word I was missing when I was thinking of all this, is epiphany. That moment when you realize this interaction is something in itself. And that's when we go, wow. The three conclusions that I came to while piecing all this together and trying to figure out to me, what is this unattended moment? What is this moment when we no longer are part of what we're listening to or part of what we're consuming? That moment when you realize that the act of communication distinguishes itself from the message. The method of communicating for a split second becomes more important than what's being said. And that's powerful if you can actually achieve it. Secondly, those rare moments when, during the delivery of the message, we recognize a moment of authenticity, skill, or method as paramount to content. And that can happen with any content. And it's subjective. It depends on where you're coming from. Something that I hear someone saying that I have a personal history with is going to impact me far more than it is somebody who I don't know. And last, the sense that you have become part of the performance. By being part of the communication cycle, you have become part of the performance when someone else's story becomes yours. And what I mean by that is this. If somebody is playing a piece of music for you, that's communication, that's a story they're trying to tell you. But for me, the more important story is, and the story that I'll always remember, is how does that song make me feel when I hear it? How does Almost Famous make me feel when I watch that Tiny Dancer scene? How does that Craig Ferguson clip make me feel when I watch it? It's not about what he's talking about. I couldn't tell you word for word what he's talking about. I couldn't tell you note for note. But what do I remember? I remember the shivers up and down my spine. It becomes part of my story as opposed to being part of their story. That's incredibly powerful. There are a couple of moments. Even last night, it's only my second time here, and standing over there after the reception and just kind of looking out over everybody talking to each other. And there was that brief moment, that moment of epiphany where this moment is way cool. And I stepped back and almost outside of it for a second. And that was a really interesting moment. And you cherish those moments. You remember those moments. So the unattended moment in the communication jam, that's the power of it. I don't know how we can force people to get there, but obviously Cameron Crowe can, and he forced a lot of people to do it. So that's pretty much my presentation, all glitched up as it was, and I hope you have many unattended moments this weekend.